brands are no longer what they say they are. They're what ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI overviews, Claude say they are.
The shift from Google search to, let's say, a ChatGPT is very much evident.
SEO is still the foundation for how models determine what websites to take a look at. The irony of this whole situation is Google invented the technology behind LLMs. They just didn't choose to really capitalize on it, and OpenAI did.
Hello, welcome everyone to the next episode of the AIM Media House podcast, Simulated Reality. Today we have with us the founder and CEO of Scrunch AI, Chris Andrew. Hi, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm excellent. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for making the time. I am very excited to talk to you about this topic, which comes at a very timely manner. I think the entire SEO game is up for grabs, and I think people who are disrupting and revolutionizing in this space is going to be very critical. While the user behavior did impact me personally as well, like I'm using ChatGPTs and Claudes of the world a little more than Google directly. It didn't occur to me how that impacts big companies, right? Like large enterprises on a very large scale who depended on their Google SEO games, etc. So how did that thought cross your mind, and how did you kind of come about to solve this problem in the first place?
Yeah, great question. I think my early realization was that brands are no longer what they say they are. They're what ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI overviews, Claude say they are. And that's a huge shift in brand identity and what a product is and what a service is. Historically, we would ask a question and click on 2 or 3 different links to educate ourselves. And I saw a shift in the customer journey whereby we started outsourcing browsing at scale to AI without really processing what we were doing, right? When we get an answer back from GPT, I'm not visiting websites. When I ask a question in Google, I'm still viewing fewer websites when I get an AI overview. And so the shift for a large brand is you might spend hundreds of millions on your brand identity and making sure descriptions are accurate and reviews are represented the way you want. But these models are now really the first foray into how your company is represented. And that shift is something that I think organizations are just now starting to wrap their heads around.
How does this impact the SEO? Like, can you walk us through an example of, let's say, a brand that was heavy on its SEO game and it depended a lot on this thing? And let's first discuss the problem statement in a little bit detail. That's my thought process. And then we can kind of go to your solution as well. Give us an example of a company that was heavy on their SEO strategy and it worked for them, but then suddenly this user behavior has changed and they find themselves in a pickle.
Yeah, great question. I think the shift here is that if you think about what large language models want, the secret is in the name. They want language. They're looking for detailed information really in a human structure, right? If you think about the way Google Index and Googlebot has historically worked and rewarded folks, there's been a lot of gamification of incentives with keywords and backlinks and tactics you can drive to get to the top of those results. These models are working in a much more human, organic fashion where they're looking at the nature, the human intent of a prompt, and then they're looking on the internet for the best way to answer that question. And they're no longer just using one website to answer the question. So there's a real opportunity for emergent players to say, okay, maybe I lost out on the first ranking or the first page because it's taken 20 years to define that. But now the nature of these questions is more long tail. It's more human in its intent. And we can see what happens is that SEO is still the foundation for how models determine what websites to take a look at, right? They're going to look at an index, be it the Google index, the Bing index, or a big shift in the space is that OpenAI has introduced their own search index, which is maybe a further fracturing in that Microsoft relationship. Historically, GPT relied on just the Bing search index to determine what websites to look at. They built their own index. But again, the index is largely determined on traditional SEO tactics. But once these crawlers are on a page making sense of information, they're processing and understanding that information differently. And from there, they're deciding which brands to represent in an answer which web pages to cite as a source. And that's really the new equation that organizations are trying to make sense of. So the problem statement we see companies come to us with is, we know this shift is happening. First and foremost, we just don't know if we're showing up. If we're showing up, we don't know how we're showing up, and we don't know why we're showing up that way. What can we do about it? So you're right to point out that monitoring is often the entry point for an organization, because a board member or C-level executive said, hey, I did a search for a topic relevant to our brand, and we didn't show up. And that sends kind of a ricochet of fear through the marketing organization of, well, okay, let's create a spreadsheet with 100 prompts and start monitoring it manually. We can talk through some of the failure points on a manual approach like that. But that's often the problem statement of, I'm just not sure if I'm showing up and how.
That's interesting. But the shift from Google search to, let's say, a ChatGPT is very much evident. At the same time, the problem statement that you defined, that your customers come up with, is mainly to do with ChatGPT and some of the SEO that is there. How is it impacting Google search in itself, right? Like what is, while the number of searches will go down, which is there, how is it impacting the SEO on Google searches itself?
Well, I think what you see Google doing is moving aggressively into an AI search first experience for their consumers. The irony of this whole situation is Google invented the technology behind LLMs. They just didn't choose to really capitalize on it, and OpenAI did. And again, OpenAI kind of beat folks to the punch with a consumer experience that has been delightful. I mean, just last week, ChatGPT was adding 1 million new users an hour. It is having its moment of adoption in the mainstream. But for Google, you've seen it starting to test these AI overviews, which are very representative of how a GPT or Perplexity represents information. If you're following the Google Labs teams, you're seeing new search experiences come out that look much more like a native GPT or Perplexity experience. And all the while, the traditional blue links are getting pushed further and further down the organic rankings. And so if you think about what that means for an organization like a Google, it means they're choosing to cannibalize the ultimate cash cow, maybe the best business model on the internet, which was that mix of paid and organic search results that all of us humans relied on to get directed to the product we're trying to buy. So I think the shift to Google is enormous, but they're sitting on the world's best set of data, and they're going to participate very, very actively. Now, we do have customers coming to us saying, we've seen a 5% drop in Google search traffic almost every quarter for the last 3 or 4 quarters. We're starting to see that backfilled with AI referral traffic. We need to start paying attention to this shift. Again, think about your demographic. Think about which populations are spending more time in an AI search first experience. And that's going to kind of lead you, to an understanding of how quickly the shift is going to happen for your respective verticals.
I think that's interesting. I think I want to enter into the conversation about the demography and then user behavior across age groups, across countries and cultures and all of that as well. But before that, let's talk about Scrunch a little bit, right? So what is Scrunch doing about it? We defined the problem statement, right? We understood the context behind why you are doing this. Let's dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, so Scrunch really works in 3 ways. We have a monitoring solution, an insight solution, and an optimization and infrastructure layer. And what that means is on the monitoring side, we're helping companies understand how they're showing up in AI search, but in a very fine-tuned, granular fashion. We start with personas. What are the personas that your brand sells to? Who are the people that you're trying to appeal to? Who's trying to buy from you? Because everyone in AI is getting different search results. AI models are non-deterministic. If I ask the same question twice, I get different answers. If you ask a question versus I ask a question, we're going to get different results based on ChatGPT memory, based on the shape of the prompt. And so Scrunch starts by building personas, competitors, key themes about your organization to show you how you are being represented by the models at scale. We ask these questions multiple times throughout the week. These questions run out to GPT, Perplexity, Gemini, AI Overviews, Claude, and show you exactly how you're being represented compared to your peers, your competitors, for the personas that you are targeting. That's the monitoring platform. That is then leading into deep insights into gaps in your content strategy, right? So where am I not being represented for themes and topics that I should be, right? What are the opportunities to get new content onto my owned web presences and show that that's now being cited and crawled by the models, increasing my presence in traffic. The other piece is identifying third-party sites that are heavily valued in AI search, right? So gone are the days of me looking at one website to make an answer. GPT or Perplexity is looking at dozens, if not hundreds of presences to evaluate what content to use. There's a big opportunity for brands to make sure they are accurately and well represented in those third-party sources that have a lot of influence in the models. So that's kind of the insights layer in terms of content generation, addressing gaps. The last layer is a deep understanding of the infrastructure around what happens when an AI crawler lands on my website. How do you make sure you're tracking in your logs the activities of agents and crawlers visiting your site? How do you understand their experience when they're landing on one of your web pages? Some kind of quick tidbits. AI crawlers really can't understand JavaScript, right? The Google index crawler has gotten more mature over the years and can handle that. But if you think about what an AI crawler is doing, is it's looking for language. It's looking for unstructured data. And so we built a site audit platform that shows the experience of an AI crawler when it is arriving at your website, which is really the very first indicator of why you might not be represented the way you want to at scale. It's not able to access your content. So we have a lot of organizations we're working with that kind of work down that funnel with us. So the monitoring, insights, optimization to make sure that they are showing up at scale and that referral traffic is coming through so they can really retain control of their customer journey.
That's interesting. When SEO specialists were trying to analyze what parts of their website are making the biggest impact on their SEO game, they were probably looking at words, they were probably looking at backlinks and some of these aspects of it. Are these elements the same when you are trying to see how AI chatbots are doing that, or are these elements different? I would also like to understand that.
Yeah, my slogan is really that SEO remains the foundation of how these models determine what websites to look at, right? In the end, they need to rely on an index of pages to determine what sites to look at. But once that crawler is on your page looking for information, it's behaving differently, right? So I would not say get rid of your keyword strategy. I would not say get rid of your backlink strategy. Those are still critical components to showing up in traditional search and guiding the AI crawlers to take a look at your page. But once an AI crawler is looking at your page, it's really trying to match human intent, right? If you think about the shape of a prompt, very few people are going to ChatGPT and saying a brand name. They don't go to ChatGPT and say Nike and hit enter, right? It's not a directional search. Like that's what I do in Google. I go to ChatGPT and I ask a question like, I'm a graduating university student looking for a great deal on a laptop as I look for my first job. These are my requirements. It's usually a longer form structure. And so what type of content does really well is it tends to be a little bit more of a closer match to the human intent, right? So it's blog content, it's glossary content, it's FAQ content. So one thing we see a lot of organizations doing is they're actually bringing a lot more content online. One of the breakthroughs when we were building the company was companies were organizing their internal data for AI outcomes. All of the external data in the world, owned, competitive, and third party, is going into how your brand's products and services are represented. So how can you influence that? Make sure the right resources about your brand, product, and services are readily accessible for the models to make sense. Track if it's being cited, track if you're getting referral traffic, track if that's converting at a higher level. And so one of the things we see organizations doing is bringing content online at scale to encourage the models to have accurate sources for the answers they're trying to generate.
Fantastic. That's really interesting to me as well, right? And one of my follow-up questions to this is, now that you're observing, what are some of the cool things that you observed? Like, can you give us some examples where, you discovered something which is very unexpected and surprising? Give us an example or an anecdote, and that would be really fun to know.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun things happening right now. And I think one, it's a better search experience for consumers, which makes me excited. I think like I am browsing the internet less. Browsing by its very definition is inefficient. I don't want to browse. I'm searching for an answer. And so I think on the consumer side, there's a delightful experience for folks who participate in this for the first time, even if it's just seeing an AI overview. Now, surprising things for brands run in a couple different categories. On the concerning side, The Scrunch sources capability identifies what websites are being used in AI answers. We've had many engagements with Fortune 500 firms that find a huge amount of owned website content that is horribly outdated or not what they want back in AI search results, right? So I'm talking about situations like old white papers with product descriptions from the early, mid 2000s getting picked up by crawlers and used to answer a question about a product or service. I'm talking about community or help forums that are on a company's website that have a ton of negative content that have been left alone for a long time. Other title description, metadata becomes really critical again in today's equation because these crawlers are trying to quickly identify what pages are relevant. And so if your title and description are not representative of your page, it might skip your content and go to a competitive site or a third-party site. So there's a lot of kind of wow moments that are risks on the brand side. In terms of opportunities, these models are trying to be unbiased, right? They don't want just to look at your website and be told you have the best product. That's what most organizations are going to do. One thing I've seen working at scale has been lists and comparative sources of here's how kind of very progressive insurance. Here's my rates compared to my competitors. Here's my features compared to my competitors. And GPT loves that content. It's like, okay, this is a more unbiased representation of the category. I'm going to link to this company's web. Comparative sources becoming a valuable resource for organizations. We also see a heavy return to FAQ style content, glossary style content, knowledge-based style content, lots of text, because what do large language models want? They want language. And so those have been some of the wow kind of aha moments. The one other I'll highlight just as a thing to be careful with is some organizations are trying to do this manually. They'll go run searches. Keep in mind these models, a lot of them have memory. So if you keep running these searches from your laptop about your company, it's going to start to learn that you want to see your company in the results, all the way to the fact that at some point it'll say, hey, company name in parentheses, your company is great at these things compared to your competitors. The model knows that it's you, that you work for the company. And so it starts to steer the results maybe towards what you want. That is not going to be representative of what your personas see. And so being very fine-tuned and granular and how these searches are structured, the personas you're trying to map to, these all become kind of aha moments in terms of how we've architected the platform.
That's super cool. Really interesting stuff, right? My follow-up question to that is, ChatGPT has also evolved a lot since it came, right? And Perplexity has evolved a lot. Every tool will keep evolving. And I think the pace of innovation is just phenomenal. I think we are in a very, I was just saying to my cousin is a ML engineer. I was just telling him that we are in a very interesting time to be alive, right? Of all the times that we could be alive in the history of Earth. And the way these things are evolving and the scale and the pace at which they are evolving is just phenomenal. So what might be relevant for search and was not pre-ChatGPT, do you think that we will face again the same situation again in 4 years, or do you think that there are some fundamentals to the search optimization that will remain constant? And how do you envision Scrunch's journey along that?
The way I envision our journey is by sticking right with it. My co-founder and CTO, Robert McCloy, is one of the most technical individuals I've ever met in my life, deeply understands how these models work. We spent well over a year really trying to understand how these searches are structured and architected and why the results are the way they are. And one thing that's been deeply true over the last 18 months of work and building is that the models are frequently changing, right? There's a new model that comes out. There's a new way search results are being represented. I would say a lot of the folks in the space are thinking pretty rudimentary in terms of, well, how do I represent the answer today? Keeping pace with the evolution of change is massive. So I'll give you one example. In mid-March, OpenAI had a bunch of announcements. Buried in those announcements was them really pushing their own search index, the OAI search index or search bot. And that was a move away from Microsoft. It's something they'd had that they've been exploring for quite a while, but they've started to rely on more and more results from that source. These types of changes yield different results. And so I do think an enterprise needs a partner to keep pace with the change in results, whether that's from GPT, from Perplexity, from Claude. Meta AI is a player not to be ignored as well. They've turned every one of their properties into an AI search platform, right? So if you've been on Instagram looking for a friend's handle, you're kicking off an AI search result. There are many, many new participants in the space. And I think the best thing you can do is find a partner, find a technical team that really understands the way these models work and is committed to keeping pace with it. So I do expect we will see change faster than we've seen algorithm change from Google. My hope is that it's a more steady, positive evolution for consumers and less jarring. Obviously, in the search space, some of those algorithm changes change everything for a business. AI search has changed everything, but I think the goal is evolving more and more towards identifying truth, identifying the answer to a consumer's question, and less about gamifying these platforms to give the results that you want. And so we'll see how this shift plays out as more monetization comes into the equation, but it's been very interesting to be, hopefully at the leading edge of it over the last year and a half.
This was super fun. This conversation was very, very interesting. I had a lot of insight into this. Some of these things that you take for granted, I don't think you realize as a consumer how it is impacting the larger scheme of things, the supply chains, the search management, and so many functions across large enterprises are getting impacted. Your journey is very inspiring, and thank you so much for making the time to speak with me.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.